The morning after my 18th birthday, the kitchen felt colder than it should have. Weak spring light slid across the oak table, catching in the swirl of my father's coffee and the tremble in my mother's fingers. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the wall clock, steady as a heartbeat. My father nodded toward the chair across from him, a gesture as flat as his expression. My mother tried on a smile that never found her eyes. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, then settled. I set my mug down, and the ceramic touched wood with a small final sound like a gavel. "Sit," my father said, and it wasn't a request. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight for a future that someone tried to take, hit that like button and share this with a friend who needs the reminder. Make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss the next parts of this story. To understand why that kitchen felt like a courtroom, you need to know how we got there, how a birthday check and a long habit of looking the other way led us to the edge. I grew up in a modest brick 3-bedroom on a quiet street in Pennsylvania, where the mail arrived around noon and porch lights clicked on by habit. We were never poor, never lavish. My father managed sales at a local dealership. My mother kept the books at an insurance office. They called us comfortable. I learned early how comfort can hide a draft. My brother Jordan was the golden thread in their tapestry. He rarely asked twice for anything and rarely heard the word no. When I turned 16, I got a bus pass with my birthday cake and a suggestion to get a little job. When Jordan turned 16, a Ford Mustang rolled up the driveway with a bow big enough to blanket the hood. My parents called it motivation. I called it a message. I learned to be the kind of girl who stayed late for extra credit and picked up weekend shifts at the diner. I learned how to keep my voice soft when I wanted to object. Between homework and refilling coffee cups, I built a private life of ambition, a stack of biology notes, a stethoscope borrowed from a nurse cousin, a list of schools with pre-med tracks that made my hands shake with hope. On Saturdays, I took my hope to Grandma Margaret's screened porch, where mint leaves floated in our iced tea, and the air smelled like tomatoes on the vine. She listened the way some people pray, quiet, intent believing. My 18th birthday was a Saturday. My mother strung the same faded banner we'd used for a decade and set plates under a store-bought cake chocolate with vanilla frosting, the kind Grandma remembered I liked. Dad flipped burgers in the backyard while Jordan sulked near the patio door, phone in hand, foot-tapping. My two closest friends, Tara and Jessica, brought a used stethoscope polished to a shine. For Dr. Annalie, Jessica said, and I laughed in a way that felt like a window opening. Then, Grandma arrived with a canvas tote and a slim white envelope pressed to her chest. She hugged me so tight, I could feel the years stitched into her cardigan. "This is from me," she said, "and from your grandfather, because he'd want to be here." The envelope was heavier than it looked. When I slid the check halfway free and saw the number the room tipped, $88,000, written in a careful hand. For a moment, the party sounds receded, the sizzle from the grill, the muffled music from a neighbor's radio, the low buzz of conversation, and all I could hear was my heartbeat in my ears. The check meant dorms instead of a couch. It meant labs and lectures and loans I might not have to carry on my back for the next 20 years. It was a door, and for the first time in my life, the knob turned easily in my hand. I looked up to thank her, and that's when I saw my parents. Not clapping, not smiling. Something passed between them like a shadow. "This is too much," my mother said, finally twisting her napkin into threads. "Nonsense!" Grandma answered, her voice as steady as a hymn. "It's for her education, and it's hers." Dad cleared his throat the way he does when he's about to announce a policy he'll call reasonable. "College is expensive. We'll want to talk about how to handle the logistics." The party never quite found its rhythm after that. It moved forward as if through water gifts opened slices served photos taken with careful distance between people who lived under the same roof. Later, when I hugged Grandma at the door, she leaned close and lowered her voice. "Keep it safe tonight," she said. "Tomorrow, we'll put it where it belongs. And remember, this is your future. Don't let anyone repurpose it." I slid the envelope beneath my pillow like a child hiding a treasure map. Around midnight, a pipe knocked in the wall and woke me. I could hear my parents in the kitchen, voices pitched low, but urgent. The words weren't clear, but the shape of them was. I lay still, one hand pressed above my ear, the other on the envelope. The house hummed. The clock ticked. I counted each beat as if I could slow time by naming it. In the morning, the kitchen had the suspended feeling of a storm that hasn't broken yet. My mother's smile sagged. My father's jaw set. The chair scraped as I sat. "It's about your grandmother's gift," my mother began, each syllable smoothed like she was afraid of a rough edge. "There are things we need to handle first. As a family." I waited. My father took off his glasses and drew a thumb over the bridge of his nose, a gesture that meant bad news or bills. "Your brother's in trouble," he said. "Serious trouble." I pictured Jordan sleeping until noon, the car he'd driven too fast and too late, the stack of new games by his TV. "What kind of trouble?" "Financial," my mother whispered, as if the word itself could attract lightning. "He owes $65,000. Some of the people are—" She stopped, looked down at her hands, and swallowed. "They're not kind." The number hit me in the chest. I tasted metal. "He's 16. It started with gambling online," my father said, his voice moving into the just facts tone he used with angry customers at the dealership. "He took my card. It snowballed. He borrowed to cover what he lost. Now it's time-sensitive." My mother reached for my hand across the table and found only wood. "We're asking to borrow from your college fund. Not all of it. Just enough to make the danger go away." The refrigerator clicked off, and the silence that replaced it felt like a drop. I could hear the soft scrape of my father's shoe on the floor, the weight of their eyes. "You're asking me to choose?" I said, surprised by how even my voice sounded. "Between the future Grandma built for me and the mess Jordan made." "This is family," my father said, and the words sounded like a lever he could throw to lock me in place. "We'll pay you back before you need it. We can refinance the house. There are options." "If there were options," I said, "you'd be using them instead of me." Just then, Jordan padded in from the hallway, hair flattened on one side, pajama pants too long under his heels. He opened the refrigerator and lifted a carton of orange juice, as if he lived in a house where nothing had weight. He drank from it, then looked over the door. Did Annie agree I didn't say anything at first? I watched the way his mouth tilted, the loose confidence of someone whose life had been paved over and over by other people's shovels. "No," I said, "and don't ask again." He rolled his eyes in a practice circle. "You could do community college for a year. It's the same classes." I thought about the nights I'd done homework on the couch while he revved the Mustang in the driveway just to feel the engine shiver. I thought about Grandma's porch and the smell of mint, the way she'd said, "This is where it belongs." I thought about the relief that had flooded my chest when I saw the number and understood what my life could look like. My father stood, palms flat on the table. "You're still under our roof, young lady. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for loyalty. We're asking you to help keep your brother safe." "Sell the car," I said, turning to Jordan. "Get a job. Face something." "The car's in our name," my father shot back. "And it won't cover enough." "Then face something anyway." My mother's eyes filled tears, trembling but not falling. "Please," she said, and the word was soft and sticky, meant to catch. "We can't watch him get hurt." Something in me tilted, then steadied. I felt my spine line up with the back of the chair. I rested my hands on my knees and let the room come to me on its own terms, the coffee ring on the table, the faint grease smell from last night's grill, the pale stripes of light across the floor. These were the real things. They didn't change because someone wanted them to. I looked at my parents, the people who had measured fairness with different spoons for as long as I could remember, and I saw not just their fear, but their habit. "I won't do it," I said quietly. "I won't let you turn my future into a bandage you rip off the moment it hurts." My father's expression cooled by degrees. He set his jaw the way men do when they're about to make a rule sound like fate. "You have until tomorrow to reconsider. If you can't be a team player in this family, the team won't carry you. No more free room and board. No more phone on our plan. No more health insurance." My mother finished, her voice breaking on the words. Jordan leaned on the counter and unlocked his phone, his thumb moving easily. "You'll cave," he said without looking up. "You always do." For a second, the room blurred at the edges. I could feel my pulse in my throat the way it does when you almost step into the street and a car you didn't see passes by close enough to lift your hair. I stood and pushed in my chair with care, aligning it with the table out of reflex. I felt the smooth wood against my fingertips and understood what that tiny act revealed. I was the kind of person who would take care of things even when the people around me didn't. I was the kind of person who would choose. "I'm going to my room," I said, and I walked out without waiting for permission. Upstairs, I closed the door and leaned against it until my breathing matched the clock on the dresser. I slid the envelope from the drawer and held it in both hands. The paper was cool, the ink fixed. I pictured Grandma at the bank 18 years ago, setting aside what she could month after month, believing in a girl I hadn't yet become. The belief was inside the number, but also beyond it. I could feel it traveling through time, steady as the ticking on the wall. By late afternoon, the house had quieted into that Sunday hush where even footsteps sound like apologies. I wrote a few lines in my notebook, names of schools, dates of deposit, a small budget column where numbers settled like birds on a wire. Then I slipped my phone under my pillow next to the envelope. The light outside my window turned from gold to gray. Somewhere downstairs, the dishwasher began its soft, rhythmic churn. I wasn't naive. I knew what it meant to say no in a house where all the yeses had been reserved for someone else. I knew what was coming, the raised voices, the threats wrapped in love, the knock on my door that wasn't a knock at all. I lay on my side and watched the hallway under my door fill with the thin blue of evening. My hand found the envelope in the dark. The paper didn't give. When the first floorboard creaked and my father's voice reached up the stairwell low and certain, "We'll talk to her in the morning." Family comes first. I opened my eyes to the ceiling and felt something inside me settle into place, like a key turning. The house went still. The clock ticked on. I waited with the quiet you learn only after a long apprenticeship in being overlooked, a quiet that holds space for whatever courage needs to grow. And in that small pause between what had been decided for me and what I was about to decide for myself, I understood that the morning would not just be a conversation. It would be a line. The floorboards in the hallway settled into silence, and I lay awake watching the faint blue glow along the crack beneath my door fade with the night. The house felt unfamiliar now, every sound sharper, every shadow carrying weight. Somewhere downstairs, my father's voice had said, "Family comes first," as if that simple phrase could rewrite the meaning of fairness. I knew morning would bring a reckoning. When the light finally crept across my ceiling, I had already been awake for hours. I slipped from bed, checked that the envelope was still tucked beneath my pillow, and pressed it flat against my chest. The paper was cool, solid, and terribly fragile. Outside my window, the dogwood trees shivered in the early spring breeze, pale petals scattering across the lawn like torn paper. By the time I went downstairs, my parents were already waiting at the kitchen table. My father's tie was knotted, his coffee untouched. My mother sat beside him, hands folded over a napkin she kept twisting into threads. Jordan hadn't surfaced, which was both a relief and a confirmation this meeting wasn't about him. It was about control. My father gestured to the chair across from him. I sat, and for a long while, none of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly enough to fill the space between us. Finally, he leaned forward and said what I already knew he would. "We've talked it through, Annalee. We need that money to settle things for your brother." My mother's eyes shimmered. "It's not forever, just until we can refinance the house." I stared at the faint rings of coffee stains on the table, the kind that never quite wash out. "You're asking me to give up my education," I said quietly. "The one thing I've worked for." My father straightened. "We're asking you to help your family." "There's a difference." I wanted to shout, but my voice came out soft even. "I've been helping this family my whole life. Every extra shift, every scholarship form, every time you said no because Jordan needed something first." He pushed back from the table. The chair legs scraped against tile, harsh and final. "You're 18, he said. "But don't mistake that for independence. This is still our home. You live here under our roof, eat our food, use our insurance. Don't forget who's providing for you." The words landed like stones. My mother reached across the table, her voice trembling. "We don't want to fight, sweetheart. We just need you to understand the danger Jordan is in." Danger. The word hung there heavy with everything they refused to say aloud. Loan sharks, threats, the kind of fear parents are supposed to protect their children from. But all I could think about was Grandma's voice the night before, calm, deliberate. "Don't let anyone tell you how to use it." I stood, leaving my untouched coffee behind. "I do understand," I said. "More than you think." I went back upstairs, closed the door, and locked it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was locking them out or locking myself in. Either way, the silence that followed was different, no longer the silence of obedience, but of choice. The day moved slowly, filled with small, deliberate motions. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet and began gathering what I could carry. Important papers, a few changes of clothes, the stethoscope my friends had given me, and the framed photo of Grandma from her porch. I hid the bag under my bed and sat at my desk, staring at the check again. The numbers still looked impossible, like a promise too large for my small world. I thought about what it had taken for her to save it, 18 years of quiet planning, discipline, and faith that I'd need it one day. Late that afternoon, I called her. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and steady as ever. "Annalee, dear, how are you feeling after yesterday?" That simple question broke whatever composure I'd managed to hold. "Grandma," I whispered, "they want the money. They said Jordan's in trouble, and they're asking me to give it up." There was a pause on the line, followed by the faint sound of her breath catching. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, still calm, but edged with iron. "That money was set aside for you and for no one else. Your grandfather and I made sure of it." I told her everything, Jordan's debt, my father's threats, my mother's tears. The words came tumbling out, each one heavier than the last. When I finally stopped, the only sound was the ticking of her mantel clock on the other end. "You listen to me carefully," she said at last. "You're not to give them a cent. That account is yours, legally and morally. Tomorrow morning, you're going to the bank with me and we'll deposit it safely. Until then, keep it close." I can't stay here, I whispered. He said if I don't agree, I'll lose everything. Then you'll come to me, she said, her voice softening. But not tonight. We don't want them to take the check while you sleep. Do you have a friend you can stay with for a few days? Jessica might let me stay, I said, already picturing her small, tidy house with the yellow shutters. Good, Grandma said. Call her, make a plan, and pack quietly. I'll meet you at the bank in the morning. We'll handle the rest. After I hung up, I sat still for a long time. The house around me carried the usual sounds, Jordan's music leaking faintly through the wall, my mother's muffled voice downstairs, the steady hum of the refrigerator. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't afraid anymore, not in the same way. When the sun began to fade, I called Jessica. Her response came without hesitation. Of course you can stay here. My parents will be fine with it. Just tell me when to come. Relief flooded through me so sharply it made my eyes sting. Tomorrow morning, I said. 8 o'clock. That night, I moved through the house like a ghost, keeping my footsteps light on the carpeted stairs. I gathered my papers, birth certificate, social security card, acceptance letters, and slid them into a folder. My duffel bag waited in the corner, half hidden behind the desk chair. From the window, I could see the faint reflection of my room. The girl in a hoodie, the envelope pressed flat beneath her palm, the quiet determination that came when fear finally wore itself out. At dinner, no one spoke much. My father's voice was calm but watchful, my mother's eyes red from crying. Jordan didn't look up from his plate. I excused myself early and went upstairs before anyone could stop me. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept the check tucked inside a book on my nightstand, my hand resting on it as if it might vanish without the weight of my touch. Just before dawn, I heard my father's car pull out of the driveway. Then the door closed behind my mother, half an hour later. Jordan's room stayed quiet. When I looked at the clock, it was 8:15. I took a deep breath, slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, and dialed Jessica. On my way, she said. I left a letter on the kitchen table before I stepped outside. The words were simple, written in my neatest handwriting. Mom and Dad, I can't give up my college fund. Grandma saved it for my education, and I intend to honor that. I love you both, but I won't live under threats or conditions. I hope in time you'll understand. Annalee. I placed the letter under the salt shaker so it wouldn't blow away when they opened the door. The morning air was cool and smelled faintly of wet grass. I walked down the front steps with the duffel strap digging into my shoulder, and for the first time, I didn't look back. Jessica's car pulled up to the curb, her window already rolled down. Ready for your escape, she said gently. I smiled a small, shaky smile that still felt like freedom. Ready. We drove in silence, at first the kind that says more than words could. The streets were still empty and sunlight streamed through the windshield, turning everything gold. When we reached the bank, Grandma was waiting out front in her light blue cardigan, standing straight as ever, her expression calm but resolute. She hugged me before I could say a word. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Now let's take care of this. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under the morning light. The financial advisor, Robert Hale, greeted Grandma by name and led us to a private office. The air smelled faintly of paper and polish. When I slid the check across the desk, my hands trembled, but only slightly. Robert smiled kindly as he stamped the deposit slip and handed me a new account booklet with my name on it alone. Watching that check disappear into the system, seeing the balance appear on paper, felt like stepping onto solid ground after years of shifting sand. By 10 o'clock, it was done. My future, at least the financial part, was safe, but the relief came with a flicker of dread. I turned my phone back on, and the screen lit up with missed calls and messages. Dozens of them. My mother's texts begged me to come home. My father's were short, sharp warnings. Jordan's read like threats wrapped in sarcasm. I showed them to Grandma, and she shook her head. "Turn it off," she said softly. "They'll calm down when they have to. You need quiet right now." So I powered it down and followed her outside. The sunlight hit her hair, silver and soft, and for a moment I could breathe again. Jessica's parents welcomed me that afternoon, as if I'd always belonged there. They gave me their spare room, the one with floral curtains and a stack of extra blankets, and told me to rest. Jessica made tea, and we sat cross-legged on the bed, talking about anything but my family. It was the first evening in years that I didn't feel like I had to defend myself. But peace has a way of being temporary. The next few days blurred together schoolwork calls from my manager, who promised to keep my schedule private whispers at the diner from customers who'd heard some twisted version of the story. My parents showed up at Grandma's house, demanding to know where I was, but she stood her ground, voice calm and firm. "She's safe," she told them, "and she's made her decision." By the end of the week, I understood that nothing about this was going to fade quietly. My father's anger had turned to damage control, my mother's guilt to rumor, and Jordan's entitlement to spite. At school, whispers followed me down the hallway, half-truths and lies spun from my brother's carelessness. Some said I'd stolen the money. Others, that I'd abandoned my family for a stranger's inheritance. It was strange how quickly people believed what made the best story. Still, every night when I came home to Jessica's, I felt a little stronger. I'd sit on the bed with my textbooks open, her mother's cooking drifting from the kitchen, and think about what Grandma had said: courage and quiet can exist together. Maybe that was what growing up really meant, learning when to stand still, even when the world wanted you to bend. On the sixth night, as I folded laundry by the window, I saw headlights pause at the curb outside. My stomach tightened. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Jessica's parents were out, and the house was too still. I crossed the room, peered through the curtain, and saw my father standing on the porch. His shoulders rigid, the porch light cutting hard lines across his face. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, heart thudding in my throat, realizing the quiet wasn't protection anymore. It was confrontation waiting to happen. The bell rang again, sharper this time. I took a slow breath and stepped toward the door. Through the lace curtain, my father's figure stood motionless under the porch light, his outline sharp against the quiet street. The longer he waited, the more certain I became that this wasn't about a simple talk. I could almost hear Grandma's voice reminding me to stay calm, to let silence do its work before emotion did. I turned the lock and opened the door just enough for the cool air to reach me. He didn't smile. His eyes looked tired, rimmed with something halfway between anger and exhaustion. "This has gone far enough, Annalie," he said. "Your mother hasn't slept in days." I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door gently behind me. The night was still the only sound, the hum of a streetlight at the corner. "I told her I'm safe," I said quietly. "There's nothing more to worry about." He shook his head, hands tightening in his pockets. "You've embarrassed this family. Running away, hiding with strangers, letting people think we're monsters. It isn't right." I kept my voice steady. "I didn't run away, Dad. You gave me a choice, and I made it." He looked at me, then really looked, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something almost human in his expression. Fear, maybe, or pride, turned inside out. "You could have come to me," he said. "We could have found another way." "There was no other way," I said. "You wanted to take what Grandma gave me. You know that." The line of his shoulders stiffened. "It was to help your brother. We were trying to protect him, by destroying what she built for me." My voice rose before I could stop it, but the words were quiet again when I added, "You didn't want a daughter that stood up to you. You wanted one that obeyed." The silence that followed was deep and painful. For a moment, it felt as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. My father shifted his weight, the porch boards creaking beneath him. When he finally spoke, his tone was low. "You've made your bed, Annalee. Don't expect us to clean it up when life gets hard." He turned then and walked down the steps without another word. His car door shut, the engine started, and red taillights drifted away down the block. I stood there until the sound faded into the distance, then went inside and locked the door again. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, something like release. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the small window in Jessica's room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I thought about Grandma, about how she had raised 3 children on her own, and somehow kept her gentleness intact. I wondered if that strength had felt anything like this lonely but necessary. The next morning, Grandma called. He came by, she said, her tone calm, almost unsurprised. "Tried to ask where you were. I told him you're safe, and that's all he needs to know." "I saw him," I said quietly. "He's not ready to listen." "Maybe not," she replied. "But keep doing what you're doing. You're not fighting them anymore. You're protecting yourself." The days that followed blurred together in small, careful routines. Schoolwork, homework, at the kitchen table. Jessica's parents treated me like family, setting an extra plate at dinner and never asking for more explanation than I was willing to give. Their kindness was so simple it felt foreign, at first no guilt attached, no debts waiting to be collected later. Still, the rumors started spreading faster than I could keep up with. By the end of the week, people at school whispered when I walked past. Some claimed I'd stolen Grandma's money. Others said I'd run away after being caught in a lie. Jordan's version of events seemed to change by the day. Once in the cafeteria, I overheard him tell someone I was being investigated by the bank. He said it with that familiar smirk, the same one he used when he knew he was hurting me in a way our parents wouldn't see. Tara and Jessica stayed close. They walked with me through crowded hallways, their presence enough to drown out the noise. "It'll die down," Tara said, once flipping her notebook shut. "People always need a story. They'll find a new one soon." But by then, it wasn't just gossip. My parents had called my workplace asking questions. They'd even stopped by once, pretending it was a coincidence. Susan, my manager, met them at the counter and told them firmly I was on break. When I came back from the kitchen, she handed me my apron and said, "They won't be coming in again." I made that clear. I thanked her, but she just waved it off. "Good workers are rare," she said. "Don't let anyone make you feel small for doing the right thing." For the first time, I started to feel the shape of a life that belonged to me. Small, quiet, but mine. Yet it didn't take much to remind me how fragile that peace was. One evening, near closing time, my mother came in. She sat at the counter, her hands wrapped around an empty coffee cup, before I'd even asked for her order. I froze when I saw her reflection in the metal of the soda machine. Her face was thinner, her eyes red. For a moment, I thought she might be angry, but when I walked closer, I saw something else: defeat. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded and told Susan I'd take my break early. We sat in a booth near the window, the diner mostly empty except for the low murmur of 2 regulars at the far end. My mother looked around like she'd stepped into another world. "You look tired," she said finally. "I'm managing," I answered. "I miss you," she whispered. "The house feels wrong without you there." I didn't know how to respond. There was a part of me that wanted to reach across the table, but I kept my hands folded. "I needed to leave, Mom," I said. "You know that." She nodded slowly. "I do now. I just didn't want to see it." She hesitated, twisting her napkin like she had that morning at the kitchen table. "Your father's still angry, but Her voice broke slightly. "I came because I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For what we asked. For how we handled it." The words hung there between us, fragile but real. I studied her face, searching for any trace of manipulation. All I found was regret. "It's going to take time," I said quietly. "You hurt me more than you realize." "I know." She looked down. "I'm trying to fix things with your brother too. But it's hard. He doesn't want help." "Then stop saving him," I said. "Let him face what he's done." Her eyes lifted to mine. "That's what your grandmother told me too." The mention of Grandma softened something inside me. "How is she?" I asked. "She's fine," she said. "She wants to see you, but she doesn't want to push." We talked a little longer about school, about work, about the weather, like we were two women learning how to speak to each other for the first time. When she finally stood to leave, she reached out and touched my hand. It was a light touch, uncertain. "Please, don't shut the door completely," she said. "We're still family." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what that word meant anymore. After she left, I sat in the booth for a long time, watching the reflection of neon lights in the window glass. I wasn't angry, just tired and strangely relieved. Maybe she really was trying. That night, I called Grandma to tell her about the meeting. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "She's reaching out." That's a start, but don't mistake remorse for change. You can forgive, but keep your boundaries. I promised I would. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close to understanding. Weeks passed, then months. Graduation came and went, with more silence than celebration. My father didn't attend. My mother sent flowers and a card that said, "Proud of you, love, Mom." I knew she meant it. I tucked the card inside my yearbook between pages filled with signatures that already felt like a different lifetime. Summer blurred into long work days and quiet nights at Grandma's house. I helped her in the garden, listened to her read from old books she loved, and slowly began preparing for the move to Baltimore. Johns Hopkins had accepted me. The dream that once felt impossible was now a date on a calendar. One evening, as we packed boxes for the move, Grandma paused to rest her hand pressed to her chest. The motion was small, but it scared me enough that I noticed. "I'm fine," she said, smiling faintly. Just old bones reminding me of their existence. I wanted to believe her. I really did. That night, as I sat on her porch watching fireflies scatter across the yard, a strange calm settled over me. The house behind me hummed with the sound of her favorite radio station, something soft from the 50s. I thought about the path that had led me here, every hard conversation, every door closed in anger, every step toward the life she'd wanted me to have. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. When I went back inside, Grandma was asleep in her armchair, the radio still playing low. I draped a blanket over her and kissed her forehead lightly. "Thank you," I whispered, though she didn't stir. I didn't know that within a few months, that gentle rhythm of peace, the shared dinners, the porch talks, the safety of her steady presence would be interrupted by a call that would change everything again. For now, though, the night was still, and the world felt briefly in balance. The call came just after dawn on a Thursday in late October. I was getting ready for class, the first real chill of autumn pushing through the window screen, when my phone began to buzz across the kitchen counter. The name on the screen made my stomach drop, Mom. We hadn't spoken in weeks. Her voice cracked before she said my name. "It's your grandmother," she whispered. She's in the hospital. They think it was a stroke. The rest of the world went quiet. I didn't ask for details, only the address. Within the hour, I was in my car, heading across the bridge toward Lancaster, the road lined with trees already half bare. The closer I got to the hospital, the smaller the world seemed to feel, like everything important had narrowed down to one room behind one door. When I stepped into the waiting area, the first thing I noticed was the smell antiseptic faint coffee, a kind of cold that lived in hospitals no matter how high the thermostat was set. My mother was there, sitting in a plastic chair near the window. My father stood behind her, with his arms crossed, his face gray with sleeplessness. Jordan sat, slouched beside the vending machines, his phone glowing in his hand. Mom looked up first. "She's stable," she said quickly. "They said she's asking for you." I didn't answer. I just walked down the corridor to room 314, my pulse keeping time with the squeak of my shoes. When I pushed the door open, Grandma's face turned toward me. She looked smaller somehow, the lines around her mouth softer. But her eyes, those clear blue eyes, were still sharp as ever. "Don't look so worried," she said weakly. "I'm not going anywhere just yet." I took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "You scared me," I said. She gave a faint smile. "Good. Keeps you humble." Then her tone shifted quieter. "I need to tell you something while I can. Promise me you'll listen." I nodded, fighting the burn behind my eyes. She squeezed my hand gently. "I'm proud of you, Annalie. Proud that you stood your ground. But don't let anger take root where love once lived. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you." Her words landed softly, but I felt their weight. I didn't know if I could do what she asked. Not yet. A nurse entered with a clipboard and asked me to step into the hallway for a moment. When I turned back, Grandma had already closed her eyes, drifting toward sleep. I stood there for a while, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the blanket, memorizing every breath. In the corridor, my father waited by the water fountain. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinner, his shoulders stooped. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Your mother told me she talked to you about the money." I folded my arms, bracing myself. "She did." He nodded once. "I made mistakes, big ones. I thought I was protecting this family, but all I did was break it." I didn't know how to respond. The words I'd wanted to hear for years sounded strange coming from him, almost foreign. He kept his gaze on the floor. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm trying to fix things. Getting help, financial counseling, marriage counseling, and Jordan's finally in a program. He'll be charged for what he did at work, but maybe that's what he needs." Before I could answer, the doctor approached us with updates, tests, blood pressure, rehabilitation. The conversation folded back into practicalities, but something inside me had shifted. My father wasn't the same man who'd stood in the kitchen that morning months ago, demanding my future as payment for someone else's mistake. The next few days blurred together. Grandma stabilized, but remained weak. The doctors spoke carefully about recovery, about long-term care. We all sat together in the waiting room, sharing bad coffee and small silences. It wasn't peace, not yet, but the sharp edges had dulled. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low outside the hospital windows, I walked down to the small chapel on the ground floor. The room was empty except for a flickering candle and the faint hum of the ventilation system. I sat in the back row and closed my eyes. I thought about Grandma's words about bitterness and how easily it becomes a cage. I didn't pray exactly, but I whispered something that felt close to one, a promise to try. That night, I stayed in Grandma's room while she slept. Machines hummed softly around us, their lights blinking like distant stars. When she stirred, I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Her voice came out faint, a breath more than a sound. Live your life, Annalie. Be happy. Don't let bitterness define you. I nodded, though she didn't see it. Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. 3 days later, she was gone. The funeral was small friends from the neighborhood, a few teachers she'd worked with, and our fractured family sitting in the same pew for the first time in years. The minister spoke of her strength, her kindness, her quiet belief in education. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium with my hands shaking, the folded paper trembling between my fingers. She taught me that generosity isn't measured in money, I said. It's in the courage to keep believing in people even when they disappoint you. Afterward, my mother hugged me. It wasn't the kind of embrace that mended things completely, but it carried something real, an apology without words. My father stood a few steps away talking with the pastor, his eyes glistening when he thought no one was watching. Jordan avoided me, but when our eyes met across the church hall, he didn't look away. It was the smallest sign of respect I'd ever gotten from him, and somehow it meant everything. In the weeks that followed, I returned to Baltimore to start my second year of college. The apartment felt emptier without Grandma's calls, her Sunday reminders to eat properly, her questions about my studies. Yet she was everywhere in the mint plant I kept by the window and the fountain pen she'd used to write notes on every envelope she sent, in the quiet assurance that I was exactly where she'd wanted me to be. My relationship with my parents began to thaw slowly in the ordinary ways that matter most. Short phone calls about grades or the weather, occasional dinners where conversation stayed gentle and practical. My father no longer gave advice in the form of orders. My mother had started taking nursing classes again, something she'd always wanted, but never finished. Jordan was the hardest bridge to rebuild. He had entered a recovery program after being charged for theft at his job. It wasn't jail time, but it was close. For months, we didn't speak. Then, during Christmas break, I came home for a few days, and one night, I found him sitting on the back porch, his face pale in the light of a single bulb. He didn't look up when I opened the door. "You can sit," he said quietly. I did. The air smelled of cold and damp wood. For a while, we just listened to the wind moving through the bare trees. Then he said, "I never thanked you for not giving them the money." I looked over, unsure how to answer. He took a deep breath. "If you had, I would have kept going. The gambling, the lies. I needed to hit bottom to stop. You were the first one who didn't shield me." "I didn't do it for you," I said softly. "I know." He gave a small, sad smile. That's why it worked. We talked for hours that night, about everything we'd never said before, the pressure he'd felt to live up to Dad's expectations, the guilt I'd carried for being invisible. When we finally went inside, the air between us felt different. Not warm, exactly, but no longer cold. 2 years passed like that steady, cautious healing. My father stopped chasing easy money and started working as a consultant for the dealership. My mother finished her degree and took a job at a nursing home, saying she finally understood what fulfillment meant. Jordan found a rhythm working part-time while studying computer programming. As for me, I buried myself in medical school. Long nights, endless, studying the quiet satisfaction of seeing hard work transform into skill. Some nights, I still caught myself reaching for the phone to call Grandma before remembering she wasn't there. But her words lived in me like a compass, steady guiding and kind. When I graduated, my parents came to the ceremony. They sat near the front, my mother dabbing her eyes, my father clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Afterward, we took a photo together, the first in nearly 6 years. The smiles weren't forced this time. They were tentative but true. Later that night when I got home, there was a small box waiting on my doorstep. no return address. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was Grandma's old fountain pen and a journal I'd never seen before. On the first page, written in her looping handwriting, was a single quote from Maya Angelou. I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. Beneath it, she'd written, Remember, Annalie, the greatest gift is not money, but the courage to walk your own path. True generosity can only come from strength, never guilt. I am so proud of you. I closed the journal and sat there for a long time, the streetlights spilling gold through the window. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace, not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood what she'd been trying to teach me. Outside, the night wind brushed against the glass, soft and constant, like the quiet echo of her voice saying, Live your life, be happy. And I intended to. Morning light poured through the thin curtains, soft and steady, touching the edges of my desk like a gentle hand. I sat with Grandma's journal open beside a mug of coffee, the fountain pen resting on its ribbon marker. The air was still, except for the slow ticking of the clock on the wall, a rhythm I'd come to associate with peace. It had been nearly a year since graduation. The world outside my apartment window was alive with spring again, dogwoods blooming white against a blue sky, the city shaking off its long winter. I'd started my residency at the hospital 3 months earlier. The hours were long, the work demanding, but there was something healing about helping people find hope where there had once been fear. It made me think of her, of how she always said courage wasn't loud, it was steady. Each morning before work, I wrote a single line in her journal. Not a diary entry, not a confession, just a thought she would have appreciated. Some days, it was about a patient. Other days, it was about the weather, or the way kindness shows up when you least expect it. Today, I wrote 6 words and underlined them twice. Peace isn't a gift, it's earned. I carried that thought with me as I drove to the hospital. The city moved around me, busy and half awake, delivery trucks rumbling through side streets, the scent of bakery bread drifting through an open window. I used to rush through mornings like this, chasing a future I wasn't sure how to reach. Now I understood that the small, quiet moments were the ones that built the life itself. At lunch, I sat in the courtyard with Jessica. She worked nearby as a counselor and sometimes met me between sessions. Her laugh hadn't changed in all the years I'd known her. Bright, unguarded, a sound that reminded me not everything in life had to be heavy. You still writing in that journal? She asked, tearing a piece of her sandwich and tossing it to a passing sparrow. Every day, I said. Feels like she's still listening. She'd like that, Jessica said softly. She'd be proud of you. I hope so, I said. I'm trying to do what she taught me, help people without losing myself in the process. Jessica smiled. That's harder than it sounds. It is, I admitted, but I think that's the point. That evening, when I returned home, a small envelope was waiting in my mailbox. My father's handwriting, careful, formal, the kind of script that always tried to control emotion. Inside was a folded letter. The paper smelled faintly of his cologne, the same kind he'd worn all my life. He wrote that he and Mom had decided to sell the old house, that it was time to start fresh, somewhere smaller, simpler. He said they were donating a portion of the sale to a scholarship fund in Grandma's name, the Margaret Carter Memorial Grant for first-generation students. At the bottom, he'd written, We thought you might help us choose the first recipient. Love, Dad. I read it twice, then set it down beside the pen. For a long time, I just stared at the handwriting, the hesitation between words, the space where apology and pride seemed to overlap. There was no mention of forgiveness, No attempt to rewrite history, just effort. And effort was enough. The next weekend, I drove out to see them. The old house looked smaller than I remembered, the shutters fading, the garden overgrown with early weeds. My mother greeted me on the porch with open arms. She didn't rush forward this time. She waited until I stepped toward her. Inside, the walls were bare except for one framed photograph, Grandma, at her piano, a soft smile on her face. My father stood by the window, his posture uncertain until he caught my eye. He nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something larger than words could carry. Over dinner, conversation flowed easily for the first time in years. My mother asked about my patients, about my apartment, about whether I was eating well. My father listened more than he spoke. When the meal was over, he carried the dishes to the sink, without being asked, rolling up his sleeves like an ordinary man doing an ordinary thing. Later, we sat on the porch. The air smelled faintly of rain, the kind that lingers before it finally breaks. Jordan arrived just before sunset, driving a used truck that coughed at every stop. He looked older, leaner, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. He handed me a small wooden box. "I made this," he said quietly. "Started carving last year in therapy. Keeps my hands busy." The box was smooth, the lid etched with tiny ivy leaves winding around its edges. Inside was a small note that read, "Thank you for letting me fall. It's the only way I learned how to stand." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I just closed the lid and placed my hand over it. "You're doing well," I said. "Trying to," he answered. "That's the part people forget. You have to keep choosing better every day." We watched the sky shift from gold to violet, the first drops of rain tapping against the porch rail. My father turned on the light above the door, and the glow caught the edges of the ivy box in my hands. For the first time in years, the word family didn't sting. It didn't carry the weight of obligation or pain. It just meant people flawed, learning, still trying. A week later, the scholarship ceremony took place at the community center. My parents stood beside me as we presented the award to a young woman named Marisol, a first-generation college student planning to study environmental science. She held the plaque with trembling hands, her mother watching from the audience with tears in her eyes. When I handed her the certificate, I saw something in her expression that mirrored the girl I used to be, nervous, determined, believing in the impossible. Afterward, my father touched my shoulder. "Your grandmother would have liked her," he said. "I think she does," I replied. When I drove home that night, the moon was high over the river, its reflection shimmering across the surface, like a promise half-whispered. I rolled down the window, letting the wind pull through my hair, the air cool and sweet. The ache that used to live in my chest had changed shape. It wasn't gone, but it had softened like a scar that no longer hurt to touch. Back in my apartment, I placed the ivy box on the bookshelf beside Grandma's photo. The pen rested on top of her journal, the last page waiting. I didn't know what I'd write yet, but I knew it would be simple, something about how love and boundaries can exist together, how strength can sound like quiet. I turned off the light and walked to the window. Below, the street shimmered from a passing rain, lamplight stretching across the wet pavement. Somewhere in that reflection, I felt her presence, steady, patient, smiling. People like Grandma don't really leave. They settle into the spaces between your choices, the moments when you pause before reacting, the calm before you speak. That's where she lives now, in the stillness I once feared, in the peace I learned to keep. And as I stood there watching the night settle into itself, I finally understood what she meant by true generosity. It wasn't about giving things away. It was about giving people the freedom to change, including yourself. I smiled, closed the curtains, and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." If this story reached you tonight, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever found peace after a long road, share it. It might help someone else keep going. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, healing, and the power of choosing peace. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to let go and live.